This is Growth Guide, a podcast exploring the depths of curiosity, questioning everything in the name of growth. I'm your host, Brian D'Alessandro. Today is my most special guest to date, a man that has played a tremendous role in my life, serving as a teacher, inspiration, and so much more. 94-year-old Conrad Homler is my grandfather. I have been truly blessed to have him as an elder and a fixture throughout my entire life. This episode is about honoring our elders, slowing down to connect with those who have paved our way. Let's acknowledge the change that occurs in just one lifespan and about capturing the amazing stories that are so often lost or degraded over time. Born in 1927 in Brooklyn, New York, Conrad entered in through the Great Depression. Not liking the austere world he experienced, he promised himself that he would create a more desirable life. He graduated high school at 15 years old and went to college on full scholarship, all while working to help support his family on $3 a week. He served his country in the Navy, narrowly avoiding deployment to the Bikini Islands, where the U.S. government's upcoming atomic bomb tests were set to take place. He lovingly reflects on his relationship with his wife, my grandmother, of 75 years, whom we lost just this past year. As you'll see, he has a memory like a steel trap, an endless pursuit of growth, and the vigor of a much younger man. Hello, Grandpa. So grateful to have you in my life and to be able to sit here and have this conversation. First, let's start off with your name and when you were born.
Well, as you well know, my name is Conrad, middle initial or name Philip Homler, and I was born March 15th, the Ides of March, 1927.
All right. Now, you say the Ides of March. Was that something that was still looked at conspicuously?
Well, if you remember your history, the Ides of March was the date that Julius Caesar was assassinated.
And random mayhem and oddities would come about, right?
That is correct.
So, how do you think that plays into your particular birth date?
Well, I don't think it has any real reference to my birthday, as I am here now and have not been assassinated.
There you go, or assassinated anyone. So, we've spoken over the years, over the decades, around different change that's coming about. And one of the things that's so amazing and admirable about you is you always embrace the new change, the new technology, and really curiously look at what's unfolding in the world. I'd love to start by going back to when you were a child and just painting a picture of what the world looked like back then, because we've seen such tremendous change in your particular lifespan.
That is true. Things, I assume, have improved, although that's questionable at this time. Well, I was born and brought up in Brooklyn, New York, by my parents, my father, Murray Homler, my mother, whose maiden name was Warshawski, Rose Warshawski. My father's family came from Austria. My mother's family came from Russia. They both came to the United States practically as infants. My father worked for his own father, who was Solomon Homler, who was an entrepreneur and who became involved in the manufacture of ladies' midi blouses. And he recruited my father to be his assistant and wasn't too interested in further educating him other than for his own useful purposes. My father subsequently uh, became an insurance agent who would sell life insurance policies to people in that area. My mother, as she grew up, did some millinery work. When they were married, we continued to live in Brooklyn with pretty austere financial conditions. We, of course, did not enjoy the Depression years.
So, how old were you when the Depression years were kicking in?
Well, I was rather young because I was born in 1927. The Depression years were in the early 30s, 31, 2, 3, thereabouts. So we really didn't have any luxuries, and unfortunately, my father was unemployed for quite a while. The people who he had sold insurance policies to could no longer afford to pay the premiums, so most of the policies lapsed, and with that, my father's employment as an insurance agent ended too. We had quite a few years of not very happy circumstances with very limited uh, finances available. And I, at a relatively young age, began to seek different ways of earning some money. And I did this voluntarily, and this was really part of the lifestyle of many people at that time.
What was the first job that you took or found?
Well, the first job that I took, actually, I became a member of a choir, and for the high Jewish holidays, this choir would go to other synagogues outside of the area that we lived, and I was actually put up by very nice people for several nights while the choir would sing during the religious services of the holidays. And it was called Mr. Katz's Choir, and we began to joke about it, and we called ourselves Mr. Katz's Kittens. And I had pleasant experiences with that, and that lasted for several years. As I grew older, I began to look around for other work, and I met a Mr. Hyman Weisberg, who had a retail store where he would sell and manufacture slipcovers and draperies. And he taught me how to sew some of the draperies and the slipcovers, and I then had the job of using an iron to press them after they had been sewn and put together. And then he began to, in addition to that, he began to do reupholstery work, where people would bring their worn-out furniture to him, or he would pick it up, and it would be reupholstered and then redelivered to them. Now, the means of delivery and pickup was a horse and wagon, and I would sit with him on this wagon with the horse, and we would plod through the Brooklyn streets to wherever we had to go, and then I would help him carry whatever we had up to the customer's home where it was assembled, and that was the extent of that activity.
Does it just, kind of make you chuckle when you think about how you can call an Uber now and get wherever you want?
Oh,
you
yeah. Well, I said things have changed considerably. And while I was working, of course, I was getting the very large salary of $3 a week. And for that, I worked after school, which would be from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. And I would work 6 days a week. And on Sunday, I would only work Sunday morning until noontime. And from those meager dollars that I earned, most of it was given to my parents to help support the family. And a very small amount I began to accumulate. And when I accumulated $6, I bought my first two-wheel bicycle, which was an old bicycle that I bought from someone. And I then began to repaint it and try to restore it to pristine condition.
Now, did you know how to ride a bike at this time?
No, I didn't know how to ride a bike.
Okay, so let's get into that because...
Well, okay. I knew that, I had to learn how to balance myself on the bike. So I took the bicycle to the schoolyard of my school where they had long cement walls all around. And I would lean against the wall and push myself off. And little by little, I acquired the ability to balance myself, and I taught myself how to ride the bicycle.
Amazing. You were clearly so industrious in how you approached anything and were willing to figure out a way to creatively problem solve. How much of it was particular to you and your personality versus the nature of the times that you were growing up in?
Well, from a very early age, I realized that our lifestyle was rather austere, and I kept telling myself that I will not be the same as my father, who unfortunately was unable to really get very far. And I always felt that I wanted to push myself to get ahead in any way I could. We had certain pleasant times. In the summertime, my father was able to scrape together enough money being about $25 or $30, and he would buy a very used Ford Model A automobile, which was quite a car. And we would use that to drive to Coney Island, where we would go to the beach. My mother would always prepare sandwiches, which were usually lettuce and tomato sandwiches in between two slices of bread. And we would sit on the running board of the car and have our lunch there. And those were very pleasant times. I did not know how to swim, and we'd go to the beach and I would see the other people swimming, and I was determined to learn how to do that. One day, we had a real bad rainstorm while we were at the beach. So we all went under the boardwalk to seek shelter. And when the rain stopped, the ocean was very calm. And I went into the ocean and I said, I'm going to swim. And so I did. And I began to float, and I taught myself how to swim.
So it sounds like at a young age you started making these declarations to yourself or to the universe that you were going to do it a different way, and it seemed to respond in kind, and you were able to do things. Did this give you the assurance and confidence that you could use this as a philosophy in your life?
Well, at that point, I was too young to really understand the philosophy of life. But I knew that there were better ways to live, and I was determined that that better way would be what I would seek.
And so that turned into education being very important to you and something
Yes.
you excelled at. How did that all unfold?
Well, I was determined to do well in school, and I remember I went to Public School 109, which was just across the street from the apartment house in Brooklyn that we lived in. And it was called the Strauss PS 109 was the school. Right on, as I got a little older, I had one teacher I remember, Miss Johnson, who was a very strict teacher, and she believed in capital punishment. If you would speak out of turn or did not do your homework correctly, you would get a whack with a ruler over your knuckles. And after a while, through a lot of determination, she made me her monitor, which was a big success.
Mm-hmm.
And then later in that school, I was able to join the Honor Society in that junior high school. And from the junior high school, I had the choice of going to the local high school, which was Thomas Jefferson High School, which was a co-ed school, or the boys' high school in Brooklyn, which only had male students and was considered a better school than the other. And I applied for admission and was admitted to boys' high school. But I have to tell you that when I went into junior high school, I was able to get into the RA, Rapid Advance class. So I got into high school at a very young age because I was actually a year and a half ahead of the other students.
Mm-hmm.
When I graduated from high school, boys' high, in 1943, I was only 16 years of age. And at that point, college was something that was really out of reach because there was no money to pay for tuition. So I applied to CCNY, which was a college in which if you were accepted, you would not pay any tuition. And I was admitted to CCNY, and I attended CCNY. In the interim, World War II had broken out, and when I reached the age of 17, which was in 1944.
I don't know how you remember all these dates.
Yes.
I can't remember last year.
Well, anyway, I decided because older friends of mine there was the draft going on. Young men who had reached the age of 18 were drafted into the service, and most of them were drafted into the Army. And I would get letters from friends of mine telling me how they were out on bivouac and they were sleeping in the rain or in tents and how cold it was. And I began to say to myself, this doesn't sound like a very pleasant experience. There must be something else that I could do. So, I inquired and I found that the Navy had a program, a V-12 program, which if you passed a certain examination that they gave, you would be eligible to get into this EDDY program, which was a program of electrical engineering, which would enable you to qualify as an electronic technician. And I decided that I would attempt to do that. I got the preparatory material to prepare for the examination, and I took that examination and passed, and was notified that I was eligible for that program. So I enlisted in the Navy, but I was not taken in and sworn in until I reached my 18th birthday. And I was only 17 and a half at that time. That was in July or August of 1944. I ultimately received notice that and orders to report for my service, and I left on my birthday, my 18th birthday, which was March 15th, 1945.
Wow.
And it was an interesting trip. I had to go to Grand Central Station in New York, and we were told parents were not invited to be there, say goodbye before you left. And I got to the Grand Central Station, and there was a petty officer in charge of all of the recruits who got us assembled and gave us a whole discussion about how to avoid getting into trouble and what have you. And we then boarded a troop train that would take us to boot camp, which was in Chicago, Illinois. For reasons best known to the Navy and everyone else, we went from New York to Chicago via Canada. So when we got to Canada, we had to change trains. So we all got off the train, including this petty officer, and we were told that we had better be at this station by a certain time, because if we missed the train, we'd be court-martialed. So we were young kids. We were all just 18 years of age, and we hung around the station. And then at the allotted time, we went to the train, and we were all there, but the petty officer wasn't. And we waited around, and we were discussing what should we do. Should we go home or stay? But finally, the Canadian police put us on the train, and the train left without the petty officer. Just as we got to the U.S. border, the petty officer was dragged through the train dead drunk.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first introduction to the U.S. Navy.
So they take you from New York to Chicago by way of Canada.
That's
and
correct.
Along the way,
That's
your petty
correct.
officer, who was the officer in charge of you, ends up going and getting totally wasted. And
That's right. And
wow.
we finally got to Chicago, and we disembarked from the train, and we then had to go in and be physically examined to make sure that we were in good health, and were issued uniforms, and we were told that we would have to have various injections against different diseases, etc. So anyway, we were brought into this building, and we were told to disrobe. We had to take all of our clothes off, and they did a physical examination, and part of that was the inoculation process. So the medical corpsman in charge was, a real wise guy, and he said, "Give me your arm, and I will throw this needle right into your arm." And that, of course, made a big hit with everyone. And several of the fellows, when he picked the needle up, and of course he never threw the needle in, but they became so concerned, a couple of them passed out. Anyway, we marched then through the building, stopping from room to room where they would measure us and hand us underwear and uniforms and shoes and what have you, until we were walking around carrying great big bundles of clothing. And we then were assigned to our boot camp company and sent to the various barracks that we were going to live in during the boot camp procedure, which lasted just about a little over, it was about 45 days.
So what was this whole experience like for you? Had you had any idea? Had you seen films and movies where you had an idea of what it was going to be like?
I was an 18-year-old kid from Brooklyn who had never traveled anywhere except a couple of times up to the Catskill Mountains, to my grandparents' hotel, if you want to call it that. And this was high adventure, and I really was not the least bit concerned, and I was enjoying this new experience.
Okay, so you go through boot camp. Didn't you end up in Mississippi?
Yes, well, the program that I was involved in consisted of first going to what they called pre-radio, which was in Indiana. And we went there, and there you had a preliminary course in different mathematics and electronics. And if you passed that, there were different primary schools. I was assigned to Gulfport, Mississippi. I went on the troop train again from Indiana to Gulfport, Mississippi. And as I found out later, they told us that if they ever wanted to give the world an enema, they would start with Gulfport, which happened to have been a very hot, humid area that was so full of mosquitoes and other insects that you really couldn't put a candy bar in your locker without opening the candy bar at a later time and find it crawling with ants. So I was there in Gulfport, Mississippi, and close Gulfport, Mississippi was about 60 miles from New Orleans. And weekends, when we were given leave, we would take a train from Gulfport to New Orleans.
So what was New Orleans like back then? What did you guys get into?
The interesting thing for me, as a young man, when we got to Gulfport, Mississippi, it was the first time I had been in the South, and we got off the train and we were waiting for the bus to take us to the camp, the naval camp, where we were going to go to school. I noticed the bathrooms had signs on them, white and colored, which I had never seen before in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had water fountains that were likewise marked white and colored. And we only had white recruits in our group. There were no black recruits. Anyway, the first weekend I was off, I went to get on the bus to go to New Orleans because there was nothing but bars and barefoot people in Gulfport. It was really a real low-down city, Gulfport, Mississippi. And I got onto the bus, and when I got onto the bus, the whole first section of the bus was filled with people who were sitting in the seats. And I was in uniform, of course, and I couldn't find a seat there, so I looked in the back, and there were many seats in the back. So I went in the back and I sat down, and as I sat down, the bus driver stopped the bus, and everyone turned around and looked at me. I didn't realize that I sat down in the colored section of the bus. So I had to get up and stand before the bus would move.
And was this a concept that was just foreign to you in Brooklyn? I mean, you had diversity in Brooklyn.
Oh, yes. I never saw anything like that, and this was a whole new experience.
So how did that affect you when you got thrust
Well,
in?
it seemed very strange, but of course I had to go with the flow because that's the way things were. And it was very similar even on our naval base when the black recruits were in companies by themselves in another part of the station. And segregation was the way the Navy and, of course, the whole South was conducting itself.
Just in this regard, in equality across all measures, you've experienced such change over your decades on this planet. You want to touch on that at all?
Well, there's been a complete change in attitude towards different cultures and the ethnic makeup of people. And but you lived through that and accepted it because it was the way the world was at that time. Even when I was finished the course of study as an electronic technician, we were promoted to petty officers. And then I was assigned to a ship, which I boarded shortly before the end of the war in Germany. I got onto the ship. It was in March of 1945, and the war in Germany ended in May of 1945. And the war in Japan ended in August of 1945. Mm-hmm. So my active service prior to the end of the war was limited. But the other thing I want to just mention, while I was in boot camp, which started in March of 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed away, and Harry Truman became president. And I will always remember how they made the announcement over the loudspeaker there at the boot camp, telling us that the President of the United States has passed away, and Harry Truman has assumed the presidency, and how everyone was very quiet and was wondering whether anything would happen that we should be aware of. And I will always remember that moment. Let me just give you a little more background. When I got on board the ship, of course, I had never been on a ship before. And although, to me this was a big adventure, I noticed, all of the men in my division, we were all the electronic technicians, and we would be working on the ship that I was on was the United States ship Blue Ridge Mountains, and what that ship held the commander of operations that would invade or reinvade the Philippines and other areas to take back from the Japanese what they had captured. And the crew, it's interesting, and I found interesting, we had different places for meals. The enlisted men, and even though we were petty officers, we were considered enlisted men. We had enlisted men's mess, a separate dining room. The commissioned officers had a separate dining room. The chief petty officers, which is the highest petty officer rank, had a separate mess. Now, the black personnel on the ship worked in the kitchen as cooks and in the laundry, doing the laundry. The officers had Filipino men who would be their actually servants, who served them in their dining room and who maintained their rooms. And you had all of these classifications. And then on top of it, there was an admiral on board who was in charge of the amphibious operation. And his stateroom, it was a suite, was called Admiral's Country. And you were prohibited to go on into Admiral's Country unless you were assigned a specific thing to do there. So it was interesting to see how the ship was divided, or the ship's personnel were divided.
Mm-hmm. So after the war ends, you had an interesting proposition to go and visit beautiful Bikini Island, right?
Well, when the war ended, I was on board the ship, and the ship had just come back from China, and it was in dry dock, which means the ship was on land, held up by different frames while it was being overhauled. And I found out that the ship was being prepared to go out to the Bikini Islands in the South Pacific, where they would drop an atomic bomb to find out what areas were devastated during the explosion. This was subsequent to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and although there was so much terrible damage there, they really did not realize or know how far the effects of the bomb would be, and they wanted to experiment to find out so they could determine how in the future they could use atomic energy. And they had assembled a great group of ships that were captured from the Germans and the Japanese, and even some of the older U.S. warships. And what they would do is they painted the German battle cruiser, the Graf Spee, which was captured in South America. They painted that a bright orange, and that ship would be anchored in the center, and the other ships would surround it at 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, up to 5 miles away in circles around it. And the idea was to have an airplane, a bomber, drop the atomic bomb on this orange ship, and then the other ships that would be observers and had many officers and other people on board observing what was happening would determine the extent of the damage done by the bomb. Little did they know how the radiation would persist, and as a matter of fact, there's still a good deal of radiation at those Bikini Islands, and they cannot be inhabited, and that's over 75 years from then. So anyway, we were needed because of my ship was going to be one of the observation ships and required communications, and they wanted people who are electronic technicians to go out on this test. So they asked whether we would be willing to go out on this atomic bomb test. And again, I was a young kid, and it sounded like an adventure to me, and I said I would go. However, I said, if we go, I want to be assured that I would be back from that test in time to start the fall term at college. I wanted to go back to college. So I was told that they would consider that and let me know. In the meantime, my mother wrote to me and said that there were people from the FBI coming around and inquiring about me, and they were trying to determine whether this was a very secret mission, whether I would qualify to go. And they approved me, but my officer in charge came back and said, we can't guarantee that you will be back in time for school. In all probability, the test was going to be in June of 1946. They said there may be a subsequent test, and you may not get back until the beginning of the following year. So I said, well, if that's the case, then I don't feel that I want to go. So within a week, I was taken off the ship and sent to Long Beach, New York, where I was discharged.
Wow, you really dodged a bullet.
But the saga went on from there. I'll just mention this because, of course, I was very fortunate that I didn't go out because I understand that quite a few of the people who did came down with cancer subsequently as a result of the radiation. So when I was discharged, part of the procedure was they asked whether I would be willing to sign up for the inactive reserve. And in the event of another war, I would be called up and would maintain my rank. So again, I said, I was still gung-ho, and I said, yes, okay, I'll sign up. And I signed up for the period was 4 years. It was a 4-year enlistment in the inactive reserve. Well, that was 1946. June 26 is when I was discharged. Well, in the ensuing 4 years, I went to college. I met my dear wife, Marion, and we were married on June 3rd of 1950, which was just when my 4-year enlistment was up. And I received the papers just before the wedding, and we went away on our honeymoon. I received the papers from the Navy to extend my stay in the reserve. But I was so busy with the preparations for the wedding that I just put the papers on my dresser, my mother's home, and we were married and went on the honeymoon. And when I came back, there was a letter from the Navy, which I have a copy of, telling me that as I did not re-enlist, I have been honorably discharged from the reserve. Fortunately for me, because had I re-enlisted, I would have been called back for the Korean War. So I had two good fortunes that occurred in that regard.
Very, very big ones. Do you feel that there are times throughout your life that you've had some type of serendipity or someone watching over you?
Well, I don't know about that, but I realized subsequently how lucky I was, and here I am.
Okay, and so you met Granny in this time. How did you guys meet?
Well, we had I was friendly with a group of young men all about the same age, and we had all been in service and were discharged. And your grandmother also was friendly with a group of girls. And one of her girlfriends, Diana, arranged a little party where the boys could be introduced to the girls. And that is where I met Grandma, and that saga began.
What was it like when you guys first met?
Well, this girl, Diana, had been friendly with family, his last name was Klein, and Lester Klein, who was a friend of mine. Diana wanted to introduce to Grandma. But when we got to this gathering, somehow Grandma and I were attracted to each other, and Lester was left out of this. And we began dating, and ultimately we were married.
Yeah, that might have been the luckiest of the three events that took place.
Well, I would say for me it certainly was. And I think Grandma would tell you that our life together was a happy one.
Yeah, lots of adventures together filled with
Oh,
travel.
yeah, and she was a great sport. Although she had many trepidations and fears of the ocean and rough seas, she never said no to any of my various trips that we took. And although she was not particularly happy with a lot of the trips, she never stopped me from these adventures, and they were many, and in retrospect, probably some of the most pleasant parts of our lives together.
And I know they've certainly informed my life. And, growing up, my summers were full of trips with you guys on the boat and going out on different trips, whether for the day or for longer. How many boats did you guys own throughout the
Well,
years?
if you want me to go through the whole, it started off with me getting an outboard motor from a client of mine, one of my original clients, who couldn't pay me my fee, so he paid me with the it was a 10 horsepower Evinrude engine. And I used to rent a rowboat and then put the engine on it. And that was the first boat that we had. Then subsequently, we bought a 20 and a half foot Grady White inboard outboard boat, which we began taking trips with. And if you can picture a boat of that size, which is not very large, we took all 5 of our children on various trips, sleeping on that little boat. And that was really the introduction to our family to boating. Then from there, we went to a 27-foot boat, a Chris Craft boat, which we, by that time, I began taking various courses with the United States Power Squadron, and they had arranged a cruise for the members, and we were taught navigation and other boating skills. And we took a 3-week trip on that 27 single-engine boat to the Chesapeake Bay, and we got as far as Virginia with it, again with all 5 children, and every one of them had a job on the boat. And then subsequently, we found that that boat was a little small for our family, so we moved to a 36-foot boat. And I had that for quite a few years, and decided that I was tired of wooden boats and all the work that was connected with wooden boats, so I sold it and bought a fiberglass 36-foot boat, which we kept for several years. And then lastly, we moved up to a 48-foot Uniflight boat, which was a yacht fisherman, which we took many extended cruises on. And that's the story there.
Yeah, and you guys had a great group of friends that all had boats.
Oh, yes, we met many very nice people who became lifelong friends. Unfortunately, none of them are still around, but their children grew up without children, and some of them are still in contact with each other.
Mm-hmm. So you spoke about during your business of running a CPA firm, you had a client who paid you in a motor. You've met some other characters throughout your work life. Do you want to recall any of those?
Well, I met quite a few interesting people who you would get a laugh out of. I met a physician who went by the name of Manfred von Linde, who professed to be of German aristocracy. He professed to be a baron. It turned out that he was a phony who came from, I believe it was Tennessee, whose last name was Dent, D-E-N-T, not von Linde. And at any rate, when I met him, I was asked to come to his office, and he was a very handsome, blonde man, tall, thin. I was ushered into his office, and he was sitting on a chair behind a desk, and it was almost like a throne. And he introduced himself as Baron von Linde. His specialty was doing nose jobs on people, mainly women. And what he would do was he bought a old, half a block long Duesenberg automobile, which he would drive up to the Catskill Mountains and be introduced as a surgeon doing that type of work, mainly to a lot of Jewish girls who wanted to have their noses bobbed. I knew him for quite a few years. After a while, he began to lose a good deal of his practice and was ultimately arrested for committing abortions and was convicted and committed suicide while he was in prison. He was an interesting character.
And do you know if he was actually formally trained to...
Oh, yes, he was an MD.
He just had a whole shtick on his identity.
He had more than that occurred because he, before this arrest for abortions, he met a very wealthy Jewish girl, and he married her. And on their honeymoon, she mysteriously died in the Virgin Islands. And he was arrested at the time, but they couldn't prove that he did anything wrong, so he was released. But that's what caused his practice to be demolished. And of course, I met many other people who were interesting. There were some other people who you might find humorous. We had two brothers who were called the Gimpy brothers. They were the owners during Prohibition of a hotel in Manhattan that catered to political figures who would visit the hotel on a regular basis with their lady friends. And they also had at the hotel a speakeasy where they were serving liquor during Prohibition. I subsequently did their work. They were humorous people to deal with. And there were a whole slew of others that were interesting. And many of my clients were clients of mine for upwards of 50 years.
Really amazing. I feel like we're just really starting to scratch the surface here. So I'd love to do these conversations on a reoccurring basis if you're up for it.
Well, of course, as you know, I expect to be moving permanently to Florida, but you're always welcome there as a guest, and I'd be happy to continue this dialogue if you feel that you're interested in its continuance.
Oh, I love hearing all of these little details. Well, yeah, I'd love to hear that. So before we finish up for today, I have one last question, because the thing that is so incredible is at the age of 94, you are so sharp. Your, mental and your physical state is in such great condition. Do you have any secrets there of how you've maintained so well?
Well, I would imagine I have always been very active physically and mentally. And as well as your grandmother, we learned to play tennis, and we played tennis for many years on a regular basis. From there, as we got older, we got involved in golf, and we were members of a golf country club in Florida, and we enjoyed golf up until only recently. And the boating certainly kept us very alert. I was always mechanically inclined and involved in building things and maintaining my boats. And I think being active, and of course, in my accounting practice, it took many, many hours on a regular basis. I think all of that has contributed to my longevity, and I've always been conscious of diet, so I have avoided indulgence in alcohol and sugar, and I think that has helped as well. And of course, being married to Marion certainly was the most stimulating occurrence, because if anyone wanted to have a good time, it was Marion, and she loved her gambling and roulette, and I can picture her at the roulette table with all of the people around watching her, and with her playing her favorite numbers, 25 and 28, and all of the people chanting, "Grandma, Grandma," and she kept on winning, and everyone else was betting along with her and winning. So we certainly had plenty of stimulation.
Yeah, we had to keep up with her, right? Well, thank you so much. I love you so much, and I'm so grateful that you've been in my life for such an incredible amount of time, and I look forward to every second of it.
Well, I think you know how much I love you and your family, as well as my other family members, and you have also played an important part in my life, which I am very thankful for.
Thanks for joining us this week on Growth Guide. A big thanks to our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Project New You. I'm a huge fan of their Nitrovite nootropic brain supplement. It's helped me to develop laser focus, a better memory recall, and motivation. Nitrovite has helped me in launching this podcast amongst completing many other projects. Visit growthguide.love/focus to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. This episode is also sponsored by Morning Man. Live manly, own the morning. I learned about this from UFC champ Frank Shamrock. He was always having trouble getting started in the morning without like 7 or 8 cups of coffee. No exaggeration, I've seen this in person. So he created this product that's packed full of 45 superfoods and it has 95 milligrams of clean caffeine. So you get that charge from the greens and also get a hit from the caffeine without feeling all jacked up. I'm definitely caffeine sensitive and I like this product because it doesn't make me feel like I'm bouncing off the walls, but I feel sharp and energized to get shit done. Visit growthguy.love/morningman to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Atmananda Yoga. You guys have got to check out their yoga alignment mat. I've been using this for a long time. As you know by now, I've studied and trained with them as a yoga teacher, and the mat is incredible to deepen your practice and to ensure a lifelong injury-free practice. Visit growthguy.love/alignment for more info or to buy. Be sure to use code GROWTH at checkout for 15% off. Make sure to visit our website, growthguy.love, where you can find freebies, exclusive content, and subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you found value in listening, I'd really appreciate a rating on iTunes. I can't tell you just how important this is. Or spread the love. Tell your friends, your fam, heck, tell your spirit animals. And follow me on Instagram at growthguy.love. Be sure to tune in next week for our newest episode.